So, I may be somewhat late to the party with this, but after a little over 2 years since the conclusion that seemingly had everyone creaming themselves over a supposedly jaw-dropping moment for the MCU, that feels rather undeserving of a response like that now, based on the current climate of things relating to Kang and the MCU in general, we finally received the continuation and apparent conclusion to the journey of the God of Mischief.
Come on. What did you expect?
Well, after feeling initially underwhelmed with the events of Season 1, despite genuine moments of intrigue and effort in areas coupled with the steady decay of Marvel's reputation and standards at this point, I had minimal interest entering this season, but to my surprise, Loki managed to leave me impressed, I think.
That just makes no fucking sense.
With a showing that seems to confirm the original reports that stated Loki was supposed to be one 12-episode series that told a consistent story rather than being separated into 2 seasons. However, that is a creative decision that at least leaves me feeling that the split in the story did well for the show's presence, narrative and character work over the past 2 years.
Good job.
That now leaves Loki joining the ranks of a mere few MCU characters up to this point that are left in a state of existence that feels appropriate, earned and bittersweet, with Tom Hiddleston fulfilling Loki's journey with a sense of catharsis and relief behind his performance, that stuck the landing for comedic timing, dramatic presentation and emotional payoff, even if this was the second go around and completion of our main timeline Loki's arc through alternate means. But regardless of how we got here, I feel it's appropriate to say that he has become one of the better written characters to come from Marvel alongside Spidey, the Guardians and Tony Stark.
Oh no you didn't!
And while I have several gripes with the season that pertain to its pacing, usage of minutes, screen time balance and conclusive ending for certain characters, this was much more of a palatable experience to sit through as it felt like we were achieving something as opposed to much of phases 4 and 5.
No, he's got a point.
Now, the events of this season pick up directly where we left off, with Loki on the run from Mobius and the gang having been kicked into another point of time by Sylvie.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
And after a little back and forth, he begins time slipping through the past, present and future, which ends with him approaching Mobius, who suggests they go to a technician named Ouroboros, or OB, for advice on how to stop this from happening. And after OB informs the duo of how to correct this, Loki catches wind of what the future holds during one of his slips, where he witnesses the effects of the temporal loom's destruction as a result of Sylvie's actions in the finale last season. And just for some context, the temporal loom is a device that holds all of the branching timelines together and converts raw time energy into a physical timeline.
You know what I mean?
Yeah! Not really.
And by association, the sacred timeline and powers the TVA. So following this, Loki informs Mobius that they need to act or everything and everyone will be lost forever, and as OB attempts to tackle the overload in the present, everything goes into lockdown. But just to heighten the drama, the complications continue, where the only way our group can try to unlock it and attempt to rectify the problem hinges on them locating a He Who Remains variant that can use his temporal aura to release the lockdown due to a failsafe added in by him.
You dick!
And their search is successful, only then to fail when the variant Victor Timely is spaghettified in his attempt to correct the loom's implosion and everyone is wiped out.
Well, that's fucking not good.
But as things appear bleak, Loki's ability to time slip returns and he uses it to traverse different timelines in search of his friends once again who were reset following the loom's explosion. But it's a race against time as the destruction of the loom means that all of the branched timelines are dying, so Loki tries to recruit everyone again for reasons, but it's too late and everyone dies again.
Go dumbass, go dumbass, go! Go dumbass, go dumbass, go!
However, Loki refuses to let that be, so following more indicators from OB, he manages to gain control of his time slipping and educates himself for centuries trying to understand the problem for why the loom couldn't be fixed. And as he finally manufactures a remedy, it lures both himself and everyone else into thinking it worked.
You know why? Because you, that's why.
Only to undo itself again as it cannot accommodate the ever-growing branches, which I thought would have been obvious, but whatever. So anyway, after that fucks up, Loki travels back to the Citadel to confront He Who Remains, who reveals he knew Loki would go through this and that he knows what's to become of the multiverse once Sylvie follows through with her plans.
You stupid bitch.
so suggests that the only way to prevent this is to kill her, which Loki refuses to do, and knowing that it's all part of his plan and that the loom was put in place to ensure the multiverse wouldn't exist again and thus He Who Remained variants, Loki chooses to swipe the rug out from under him by seating himself at the end of all time and sacrifices his future and free will for the sake of everyone else in the multiverse to have theirs.
Let's put this show out of its misery.
Fulfilling Sylvie's mission and obtaining that glorious purpose he's always longed for, knowing it would be easier to confront the various Kangs than lose everyone he cares about. And following this, we close on Loki rejuvenating the collapsing branches and transforming the multiverse into a form resembling the Yggdrasil tree that allows for all multiverses to exist together where he can monitor them at once, rather than aggressively pruning them, and he seemingly restores the TVA too, which allows for B-15, Obi and Casey to lead the charge for Kang variants across the multiverse, while Sylvie and Mobius just return to life as they knew it.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
Now, that's not as in-depth as I could have gone for this, but I don't think I needed to explain much more than that for two reasons. Firstly, I believe this season is deserving of your attention for a noble attempt at entertaining you as well as being a continuation. But secondly, and rather unfortunately, I feel much of the season equally kicks its heels getting to the point at times that it doesn't need that deep dive discussion as you would expect, and that's honestly a result of its pacing and ironically usage of time.
Comedy.
Now, where much of what was explored in this season, like the results of He Who Remains' plans, Loki's glorious purpose, and the result of free will without oversight were excellently handled, and vital aspects that deserve the attention they receive, there were worlds more that could have been looked into further that I really wanted from this that just felt abandoned.
You had one job.
Just the one.
With certain assets and characters of the show like Victor Timely, Renslayer, Miss Minutes, and OB, as well as an understanding behind why Loki possesses such abilities as being able to timeslip and manipulate the branches as he does, feeling rather open-ended now, with little to no resolution to what was done with them in this. And those are just the elements I was keen to learn more about, but thanks to wasted use of time throughout this, with the hunt for Brad, interrogating Brad, Dox's warpath, tracking down Sylvie just to be rejected initially, only for her to return later on anyway, and lest we forget the goose chase for Victor, meant we essentially lost 2 episodes of space that could have been used to greater effect.
He's out of line, but he's right.
And when I say this season was kicking its heels, it's with characters like Brad and such that exemplify what I mean. There were exposition heavy scenes that varied in how effective and meaningful they were, even surrounding our protagonist, that to me felt pointless, when all the majority of people cared about was seeing how the matter would be resolved over the loom and what Loki's purpose in all this would become.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
And among all that, I mentioned before that Tom Hiddleston did well with the comedic timing in this series, but a lot of it felt especially forced at times and unwarranted, where it would have been better to let the scene breathe and unfold as it needed to, rather than trying to make every moment of Loki's twisted form a hilarious fumble, or add the occasional piece of levity to fill for time. Like for instance, when Loki is presented to OB after finally explaining his dilemma to Mobius, it's a legitimate moment of confusion for both the audience and characters that requires some clarification, as it appears important to Loki's trajectory. However, it's just passed off as being a minor inconvenience and played for chuckles, which left me in a state of frustration. But as I mentioned, possibly the biggest wastes of space and comedy in the former's case was the bizarre hunt for Brad that did little for keeping me engaged while it was there, was capped off by the pointless continuation of Sylvie and Loki's seemingly dead relationship from the first season.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
And where that time could have been used to explore more around He Who Remains or the info dump that we receive in episode 4, we jump from watching Loki and Mobius bantering in between interrogation sessions to then hunting for Pi, and finally locating Sylvie, only for her to push them away until the final second, with the pair appearing chill with her decision in the end too.
Marge, I'm confused. Is this a happy ending or a sad ending?
It's an ending, that's enough.
And fuck me, how many protracted sequences did we need of just Mobius and Loki bickering over trivial things, like who was inside of the suit on OB's model display of the Loom Center, or various shots of Loki throwing his neck back in an attempt to pull that mop top over his shoulders again, and again, and again. These may be minor nitpicks to you, but when it felt like all these moments were dragging their knuckles, it's all I could fucking see. Nothing was on the level of Taika Waititi humour that completely crippled Thor Love and Thunder's structure and tonality, but it was distracting enough that despite the limited knowledge of Loki's time slip and finally being uncovered in episode 1 to move forward with what was just outlined, including the fruitless exploits of General Dox, who was trying to destroy the expanding branches, which based on He Who Remains' plan was rather pointless too in the grand scheme of things, meant that it wasn't until episode 3 that this season managed to pull me back in with the return of Jonathan Majors as Victor Timely. An opinion of which that seems to divide people currently, as understandably many will not support or endorse someone like Majors based on the real world controversies that he's involved with, but where I can and within reason I do try to separate the art from the artist to try and appreciate the workings we receive and the performances that are delivered, assuming they're decent of course. And the frustrating part to all this is that Jonathan Majors' performance of He Who Remains and Victor Timely were executed almost expertly, and were what I was waiting for the most following Season 1. The mystery of Kang and his many variants is something that fascinated me from the beginning when I began hearing word of what he was like in the comics and the destruction that he left in his wake for our vast carousel of heroes. And while Kang wasn't presented as dangerously as I thought he might have been in Quantumania, he alone was enough for me to call that movie redeemable.
Alrighty then.
And I did enjoy the delivery of him, and to Jonathan's credit, the guy can act. However, based on how this season concluded with Loki swapping places with He Who Remains and cutting the head off that snake, it feels like the writers have found Marvel on out when it comes to working with Majors again, as well as the recent firing following his conviction. And cleverly so, however it is a shame from a creative position, as not necessarily to do with Majors, but the very concept of Kang being this behemoth of a villain that could pose a threat to reality as we know it is potentially lost now by pure association, as the constant is implied with the Ant-Man 3 post-credit scene that Majors' face was set to be on every variation of Kang throughout the multiverse. So could they even do anything else with him going forward? Well, technically yes, you could work around this by simply introducing a female variant or one singular version of him at the end of time that doesn't resemble the rest or quite simply may be older, which could work for the rumoured casting of Coleman Domingo, but we have seen evidence with Loki himself that not all characters have to carry the same face across the multiverse. However, physical displays aside, should Marvel take this opportunity and run with it and recast Kang, or should they walk away from him completely for now? Well, it depends on how invested you are, but I personally feel they should recast and continue, as it does leave things feeling unresolved and destitute narratively, as you have a background story ongoing now, with the TVA seemingly becoming Kang hunters, and we're just expected to use our headcanon and assume that he's become nothing more than a minor inconvenience, after being presented as this all-powerful being with forward thinking.
That doesn't seem fair.
Personally, I'm not buying it, and I feel it could be a colossal waste for such a promising inclusion who could have truly held the MCU's quality up moving forward had they addressed him and his existence earlier in the game and made notable moves with him as the next major antagonist. And given the lifeline that the MCU's on as of now, they need the wins where they can get them and to keep themselves in business. But as of writing this review, there have been reports and accounts stating this, that and the other since the finale, but the consensus is that Marvel are looking to move away from Kang as the next big bad and instead continue with Doctor Doom. And while I can appreciate why they choose to do this, it's a decision that does also leave a void within the MCU and renders Loki in Ant-Man 3 as ultimately forgettable over time, as Kang has essentially become a footnote in the cinematic history where he could have been the evolutionary step beyond Thanos.
I am inevitable.
And whether this is the best move or not is purely subjective creatively, as while I can appreciate the position Marvel is in right now with regards to Majors, it's not a reason in my mind to sacrifice the narrative focus that could be resolved with a simple recast. And possessing the logic that multiverse as a thing could actually work in their favour, so why not? But only time will tell with this one, and hopefully whatever is decided is done with appropriate considerations in mind. But moving away from Majors and the general negatives, we move to the minor negatives mixed in with the positives from this, with a quick look at the rest of our ensemble cast in this series, which had a few standouts with Ki Kwan, Owen Wilson and Tara Strong becoming my gold standards, demonstrating a respect and enthusiasm for the roles that they undertook, with Tara truly demonstrating how effective acting can be behind the mic, launching Miss Minutes into the upper echelon of animated characters I fucking loved, regardless of the glitch and go ending for her that needed a little more following her interactions with Victor Timely. Owen Wilson's sassy nature shined through with Mobius here, but in amongst the exhausting array of jabs and banter between Loki and himself, Wilson brought a weight to this character this time that helped to add tension when the time needed it, considering he's mere mortal and susceptible to everything unlike Loki and Sylvie, who aren't so easily defeated. And Ki-Kwan was a great little addition to the series as Ouroboros, offering much of the necessary information we needed on top of being one of the foundational elements that moulded the TVA to begin with. But much like Wilson and Strong, all of their characters eventually ended up becoming background noise with little resolution to their journeys other than Miss Minutes being reset, Mobius is stalking his kids and himself longing for what he once had, and OB is just continued to be a cog in the machine for Loki but no longer alone. It all feels rather empty for them and lacks the closure that you'd have hoped for, considering Mobius's talk with Loki was the jolt he needed to push through the pain and make the decision he did, and OB's instructions were what allowed him to take control of this and snatch the win from He Who Remains, but I guess headcanon's a thing.
Okay, fuckity bye.
Then as for Sylvie, the woman who was the equivalent of an atomic bomb for the show and set the events in motion, returned with really nothing to offer this season that we didn't already establish last time, other than showing us what free will looked like under her direction and how chaotic that all became. Which is what forced Loki to take the action he did in the end to correct her mistake, and all out of love apparently, but was also tied in with He Who Remains' scheme to link everything back and keep himself as the only variant. But quite honestly for me, if you took Sylvie out of the sequence of events, you really wouldn't have been missing much at all beyond a motivation for Loki's eventual ultimatum, which I feel he would have discovered eventually anyway, as this was exactly what He Who Remains wanted. He wanted Sylvie to act on her own desire for free will just to demonstrate how powerful he is, and to keep people in his service to stop the implosion that would unlock all of his other variants. But it wasn't until Loki realised that this is what keeps him here that factored into his decision to pull the rug out from under him and replace him entirely. But other than that, and a god-awful haircut that deserves judgment, what purpose did she really serve throughout this?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
But that aside, now I think it's time to offer a thought for the series collectively and our lead star. I generally had a good time with the show, minus everything I outlined, and to my amazement, I don't have anything against the Loki series now that I had before, now that we have all the pieces together. As I mentioned previously, this show certainly suffers from pacing issues, inconclusive endings, and an inconsistent amount of screen time, but once it finds its rhythm, it's almost unstoppable, using dramatic tension rather well, perfectly timed endpoints per episode that keep you coming back, and once it finds that final gear, the show leaves you wishing for more by the credits. There's a genuine consideration to the writing of Loki compared to everyone else, which you could say is appropriate given he's the named character, but I'd say it all comes down to Tom Hiddleston. He put in the work with the series, and you can see how passionate he is about the character after portraying him for almost 15 years. The energy behind his portrayal of the God of Stories is one of those unique sights where the enthusiasm seeps through the work itself. It feels like an emotional send-off packed with just enough we could come back to later that I wouldn't mind seeing Hiddleston return as Loki somewhere down the road. There were crossed wires when it came to what the point of the series was all about in terms of its plot, but by the end we see it's all about Loki's glorious purpose and how he'd find it, with the story of Loki surrounding his identity and potential going forward, trying to find where he belongs, what he was meant for, and what his legacy would be if it wasn't the throne of Asgard. And in my opinion, it was portrayed pretty well throughout the MCU, where his selfishness and stubbornness meant that he'd constantly lose out, only to be course corrected, and then suddenly his ambition would cripple him again to the point that swiping the Tesseract sealed his fate at the hands of Thanos. But this show wanted to give him something more cathartic, and a result that would tie Loki's goal with Sylvie, which was the idea of free will, the thread that caused him to act as he did by becoming the God of Stories and pulling the controls away from He Who Remains. And I'd say it was executed well. Loki was always torn between his ambition and desires, and he longed to be loved and treated equally, however he was impatient and caused pain for himself with the free will he had. So after undergoing an expedited arc in this series, he was pushed to using his free will to answer his ambition and become loved for it, whilst incorporating symbolic and poetic storytelling that found him seated on a throne he no longer desired, and ending this by becoming something greater than he ever would have found himself in the main timeline. And receiving that throne he longed for in a moment he didn't want it is the most profound part of this, as it's bittersweet but validation of his growth, as not just a man but as the god Thor always believed he could be. He's now ascended to that status and is above the likes of Ego in that he's got a god title with a big G.
I like it, cut G.
But before we close out, the only thing I didn't really understand is how Loki became imbued with the ability to time slip as it is. I get the logic they tried to apply to it from OB and such, but I don't recall ever seeing a definitive explanation for how he possessed such a power. I've seen plenty of discussions on it from reactors and redditors, and the consensus is that people are generally confused, but draw two possibilities, with the first being that he was given the ability by He Who Remains, or that time is passing through him due to him being out of his own. There is a chance I missed it, as I've only watched the series twice, but providing that as a plot device does require more of an emphasis and explanation than I think the writers gave. However, it doesn't detract from Loki rising to prominence once again, and in a big way that appears to be connected to the celestial side of things, with the Yggdrasil tree making a cameo in the closing seconds of What If Season 2 when the Watcher offers to show Captain Carter the stars. So I believe there's still a chance to see more from Loki. It's just a question of how can they do him justice if they do, and what role could he play now. That's not for me to say, but the theory at least is Loki can see the paths ahead, and either Kang or Doctor Doom are setting up secret wars. But I guess time will tell. However, what is telling is my lack of interest in Marvel has significantly lessened now, to the point I wasn't even sure I wanted to review Loki or What If, but I felt pleasantly surprised by both outings that I wanted to offer my 2 cents on them. However, I can't say I feel a renewed sense of interest from Marvel just from this, nor trust in them that they'll present anything effectively anymore, as since Marvel's return in 2021 with WandaVision, things have been in decline and the hype just isn't there anymore, and I can only point out 4 or maybe 5 projects that I have sincerely loved since.
I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
And I've held hope that we can return to form where the entertainment is central and they give 2 fucks about the direction of things, but I think I'm too exhausted with it now to even care. So I'm making it clear right now, I'll keep up with Marvel as best I can, but don't expect a review from me on everything they do going forward. Loki and What If are examples of a gentle wind on a warm day, but the majority of their content post Far From Home has been nothing short of underwhelming, and until they can get themselves together over there, Marvel is going to continue to see a lack of interest, diminishing returns and repeated failures. If you're a Marvel lifer, more power to you, and I hope you enjoy what you see, but as it is right now, Loki is just the latest in a small line that proves Marvel can do it if they try, and take time with what gets crafted. Otherwise, that leaves me to say Loki is not a project that will convince you Marvel's back to form, but it at least provides a few solid hours of entertainment with an emotional payoff. Anyway though, that's all I've got for now. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you like this, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe for more content down the road, and until next time everyone, take care, and I'll catch you later.